Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, our distinguished speakers. It's a real pleasure and honor for me welcoming you here on behalf of Kampusu Hybernská and Center for Knowledge and Technology Transfer, and the directors Marcel Kraus and Madame Hanna Kosová. It's already the fourth cafe collaborations, a nice occasion to meet and discuss very interesting topics. Out of these 4 events, 3 were organized with the kind support and cooperation of the Embassy of Germany in Prague. It's my pleasure to pass the micro to Madame Anna Glum, and I wish you a pleasant evening.
Thank you very much, and also a very warm welcome on behalf of the German Embassy in Prague. Welcome to the speakers. Probably today you expected Mr. Auf der Heide, the Secretary General of the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation. Unfortunately, he couldn't come today, so we are very happy that Ms. Lange decided to come today to discuss. So I wish you a very interesting discussion. The topic today is research excellence in Czechia and in Germany. And we have our panelists have a lot of experience in that field. So I wish you a very interesting discussion today and a nice evening. Thank you.
Now I pass the micro to Madame Kateřina Králová. She was our first speaker in our first cafe collaborations. So you have the floor, Madame Králová.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. Today I am changing the hat and I will be the moderator of this discussion, which is my great pleasure. And I feel very humbled seeing these wonderful scientists among us with research which is very unrelated to what I am doing. I'm a historian by training, and but every story has a history, and every story and every participant in it has a memory, and we will speak a lot about the trajectories of the excellent research and how our distinguished guests reach it. So let me first introduce our first guest, Pavel Tomančák, a research group leader at the Max Planck Institute for Molecular Cell Biology and Genetics in Dresden, and the director of the CETAC consortium in Brno, who is one of the most respected Czech scientists worldwide, with 7, a lucky number, as the current age index in Web of Science, and over 100 Web of Science references yearly for the past 2 years. He started his scientific career at the Masaryk University in Brno and completed his PhD at the European Molecular Biology Laboratory in Heidelberg. He worked for 5 years at the University of California, Berkeley, in a group of American scientist Gerald Rubin. He has co-authored more than 100 scientific publications and has become one of the most cited scientists of Czech origin. Welcome, Mr. Tomančák. And our second guest is Jelena Lange, a dendrochronologist, something which makes me a bit linguistically closer to her research, who studied geography in Hamburg and Geneva, and recently finished her PhD at the University of Greifswald, where she was also working as a research assistant. From there, her trajectory made her come to Czech Republic, and now she is at home at the Charles University Faculty of Nature Science as an Alexander von Humboldt Fellow, and at the same time leads a GACHA research project. Her research focus is on climate changes and how the climate change affects the tree growth around the globe. Very happy to have you here. I will now pass the word to our distinguished guest, and they will sort of speak to you not only about the research, but what brought them where they are today, and what was important in their academic life to reach the excellence they are today representing here.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you for the nice introduction and the invitation to come here. I mean, this is a format which, you know, as a scientist, I'm not very used to. I also come from the embassy, so I usually don't dress like this also, right? Just for the record. Topic here is scientific excellence, so I thought, you know, I will say a few words how I got where I am, and it's for others to judge, you know, whether or not what I have reached is excellence. In fact, the word excellence is very ill-defined, and, you know, I don't think that we should use it as much as we do, but nevertheless, let's talk about the path, right? So I am a biologist, and skipping through how I got interested in biology, I studied at the Masaryk University in Brno, the topic molecular biology and genetics, and you know, I have a very good experiences at Masaryk University, which is maybe kind of corroborated by the fact that I returned after 25 years back to the Masaryk University, to the CETEC consortium. Nevertheless, this was at the, you know, just after the Velvet Revolution. It was the first time where this kind of, you know, previously state, let's say, observed area of molecular biology was actually open to essentially anyone who applied. You know, I had some, you know, fantastic colleagues among my friends at the university. I mean, some of them actually, relatively few, but some of them are very successful in science. Others are extremely successful in other, let's say, areas, right? So we were really a good, you know, good bunch of people. You know, molecular biology and genetics at the Masaryk University it's in its relative, let's say, infancy at that time. And so, you know, when I finished my studies, I really was, you know, driven essentially to try my luck abroad, right? Because I really didn't completely see, you know, how I could continue with developing my kind of scientific ambition within Czech Republic. And I was very lucky to basically see an advertisement for a PhD program at the European Molecular Biology Laboratory in Heidelberg. Many of you are not biologists, so this is the best way how to describe what EMBL means, and already back then meant to us it is like a mecca of molecular biology. That's where everybody wants to go, because it's the center, it's the biggest laboratory in Europe, it is international, it is kind of coming from an organization which is older than the European Union, and it is really the impersonation of a scientific collaboration across Europe. The best scientists gravitate towards EMBL. I entered a competitive selection for PhD studies there with a very, very poor command of English, but somehow I somehow, you know, caught the attention of one of the principal investigators there, Hyb4City, who basically offered me a position, right? So I was the very first PhD student at that laboratory who came from Central and Eastern Europe. I know that for a fact, right? I think maybe what I will kind of, throughout this 10 minutes which I have roughly, I will talk about ambition. Somehow what drove me to that was the desire to do science at the highest level, and it was the ambition, and I went for it, and I'm very happy I did that, because EMBL was a place where you could really build up a network which will last a lifetime. Many of the colleagues who studied with me as a PhD students, they are now in the leadership positions in European science. For example, Patrick Kramer, with whom I was drinking, you know, beer quite often during our PhD studies, especially at the beginning. He's now the president of the Max Planck Society. Right? There are other. I could go through many of the people who have really become, extremely successful scientists and extremely powerful in science. So this was very important step in the development, in my path towards excellence, to come to a place which is really active, which is really a center, and where people live for science and they really, make connections which last a lifetime. After that, I went to the United States. In Germany, people say, at that time it was said that in order to make it in science, du musst in Amerika gewesen sein, I would say. So that was a thing, in Amerika gewesen, right? In this area, it was needed to go to America to get this experience. So I went to California, to Berkeley, and I actually joined, very luckily, I joined a really fantastic group, really famous American geneticist, Jerry Rubin. I mean, you said Gerald, but everybody knows him as Jerry, and everybody calls him Jerry, even though when I arrived there, he became also the vice president of the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, which is one of the biggest scientific philanthropies in the world, and he started building one of the biggest institutions in the world, which is at that time was called the Janelia Research Campus. I have not seen much of my postdoctoral advisor during the time, but the possibilities and resources, and once again the colleagues which I was surrounded with at Berkeley were really fantastic people, and once again you kind of developed your scientific network even further. One was using really the kind of connections at EMBL. I remember when I showed up in California with 2 suitcases, that was really difficult, to find a place to live, right? But on the street, I immediately met people from this European molecular biology laboratory, because people are traveling between the centers of science very, very often, right? So you have a network which supports you. Okay, so then moving on, I was moderately successful at Berkeley. I was there for five years, and then I wanted to go back to Europe, and so I applied for jobs, and I was really lucky to get an offer to start my own independent research group at the Max Planck Institute in Dresden. So just for your information, Max Planck Society is the biggest organization supporting basic research in Germany. Max Planck Institute is a physical thing. It's a place where you do science, but Max Planck Society has something like 80 institutes which are all over Germany. It is something very similar to the Czech Academy of Sciences. The notable difference is that they have accumulated 37 Nobel Prizes over the period of their existence. Last Nobel Prize they got this year, Svante Pääbo, for the sequencing of the Neanderthal genomes. So that was really also, once again, a fantastic environment to develop one's independent, let's say, research. I will not talk about what I work on. So I'm an evolutionary developmental biologist. We are trying to understand how animals are built from single cells through completely fascinating processes, and how these processes change in evolution. Why different animals have different shapes. That somehow arises from the process how they are being built by cells, from individual cells to the adult organisms, and we study how these processes change and diversify during evolution. We use very advanced technologies, automated microscopes which are spitting out terabytes of image data. We are using physical modeling. We are using advanced mathematics. We are using very advanced tools of manipulating genes and genomes. And one of the things which I got very much involved in was area of image analysis, where what we look at in the microscopes is in the form of images. We have to analyze it somehow. So I was at the birth of a software platform which is called Fiji. There are many stories about that, but it explains, what you said at the beginning. I have many citations actually, 40,000 of them come from one paper about that platform, right? Because everybody uses it, right? So those were some, good choices which I was doing as a biologist, investing in a development of software which I needed for my research, right? And so now I would like, maybe I'm running out of time probably, right? I would wrap it up to this kind of how from that kind of path, I started thinking about going back to Czech Republic, right? So of course, I've kind of went through the temples of science, EMBL, Berkeley, and Max Planck, and I think I've learned a lot, and I really had the desire to give something back to my country. I made many attempts to come back to the Czech academia, many of which were very unsuccessful, for a number of reasons which we can discuss if you want later on, right? But recently, one of the institutions decided to give me a chance to influence the Czech academia, and I became the director of the Central European Institute of Technology in Brno, which is, it sounds like a very, very big job, but it's actually not, because this is an organization which is consisting of 6 partners. Each one has a director who are running these institutions, and there is one director to rule them all, right? Which is actually should be called a president, because it's a kind of ceremonial function. But I think I'm in a good place, because I can actually use the connections which are built up in my scientific career, going to all these places. Now, not talking so much about science, but talking about the networking. And I could use that, leverage that to help that institution to become more internationally recognized, more connected to the established scientific institution, get more collaborations, more money, more visibility, because I'm convinced, and I've said that many times on Twitter and in other, let's say, platforms, that really, excellence, scientific excellence is everywhere. It doesn't know any borders. And unfortunately, we are now in a position in Europe where we have a very big disparity in how the excellence is realized in the Western and in the new EU countries. And I think it's a kind of a duty of every established scientist which is coming, from these areas, to try to awaken the excellence which is really sleeping in here, in the country, in Prague, in Brno, and that's what I'm trying to do.
Thank you very much for the introduction. And I was just thinking, when Pavel's research was in infancy, it was actually the time where Jelena was in her living infancy, and here she is, a great researcher who took the challenge to learn the language, to come to Prague, and to start her research team over here. Jelena, could you tell us more about it?
Yeah, sure. So thanks again to everyone for inviting me. So thanks to Hybernská campus, and thanks to the German embassy. I feel very honored to be here. And of course, I cannot tell you those things that Enno Aufderheide would be able to tell you about his experience with Humboldt Foundation. But as a current Humboldt Fellow, I think I support the idea, or I like the idea of this international exchange. So I will just tell you about my story and how I came to where I am. I'm a very early career scientist. So as Mrs. Kralova said already, I'm 2 years after my PhD, and actually during the last stage of my PhD, during the past months, I thought I will quit science, because there was so much pressure. You should publish, you should finish, and I always thought I'm not good enough. And then you knew, okay, you would need to change your environment. You should move. I mean, that's also one good thing, one thing that I like about science. But just the pressure or the expectation that you should do it in order to survive, or in order to be regarded as an excellent scientist. Well, I thought I could have an easier life, and I could do something maybe related to science administration, or something that's still related to science, but not really try to push towards the top. During all these considerations, I received an email from my current working group leader, whom I have met before at a conference, at the Dendrochronological conference. saying that they will open a position soon at the department in general. So I'm working at the Department of Physical Geography and Geoecology here at Přírodovědecká fakulta. So I have tried a lot to pronounce this name correctly. Yeah, so I got an email from him saying that they will soon open a postdoc position at the faculty in general, or not faculty, but department, in all physical geography. But if I would be interested and if I would be able to provide a competitive CV, then he could provide a position in his working group in dendroecology for a short-term project. And then he explained the project a little bit, and I said, okay, this is the only reason right now why I would like to stay in science. So, because he suggested me, or the idea of the project was to use a certain model. So, as a dendrochronologist or dendroecologist, I'm working with trees, and usually we go to the field and we collect cores, wooden cores, and in simple words, we measure and count not count the rings, but we measure the rings. But there's a lot of discussion about what is really inside these rings. So we analyze the climate effect that we can find in these rings. So rings have a different width depending on the climate, for example. But somehow the discipline got stuck a little bit, and in terms of approaches or statistical methods. And so there is a model that was invented by people several years ago, but it was just written and hidden in some kind of very statistical, complicated book. But recently more and more people started to use it, made code available, and so now there is some kind of boom of using this kind of model, and it helps really a lot to much better understand what's going on in the trees and to understand what's going on the daily level, so you can really understand what's happening every day. I mean, it's still a model, so it's still an approximation and not the truth, but we try to get as close as possible to the truth. And so my supervisor suggested me to work on this model, and he or his group are experts in that, because one group member has spent several months with the developers in Russia, actually several years ago, to learn really from the developers of the model. So I thought this is my chance to learn about that model and to learn how it works. And this relates maybe a little bit to what Mr. Tomanchak has just said. So there is excellent and great stuff everywhere. You just need to find it, because maybe it's not very obvious to everyone that there is a great topic somewhere, but in this case I had the impression, okay, this is the topic and I need to catch it. And even though they are not on Twitter or maybe don't promote themselves as someone from the US would do, or just to put up some cliches, they still do very good science. It's just maybe not the fact that they are as visible as others. Yeah, so I came here for this short contract, and I thought also it's a good chance to try a little bit this life after the PhD, because I was still in some kind of doubt and I still felt the pressure and so on. And so this would be maybe my main thing, because we are also discussing about what do excellent researchers need, or what does people attract to go somewhere. So I would say point number one is a very exciting topic, and topic which is at the top of the state of the art. So something that you really want to do, and something that has some potential to create some really great new findings. So that's, I think, the most attractive thing, and that was the most attractive thing for me to come here. And then the second point would be maybe finances. So I come here, or funding. I came here and I got a short research contract for, I think, 8 months or so, or even shorter. I think it was even 6 months for the beginning. And well, it was maybe not as high as it could have been at some position in Germany, but I really liked the topic, so I came here. But then I thought I need to change something about the budget or about the funding, and I want to stay here for longer, because I started to like it here. And this is maybe the third main important thing, that it's at least for me, but I guess also for other people, it's really important to have a good environment, a good research group, a supportive research group that is collaborative and does not just fight against each other, because sometimes it's really a fight for the best publications, for the results and so on. And I had the impression that here it is really very supportive. You can discuss everything with everyone without being afraid that someone could steal your idea or these things. And yeah, I had the impression that it's really fair and a nice environment. And so I decided to apply for more funding, because that's what I needed. And so luckily Germany has a very great funding system for scientists to go abroad. First of all, I applied for a DAAD scholarship, which is, DAAD is a Deutscher Akademischer Austauschdienst, a German academic exchange service. I guess most of you know it. I applied to them because they have some very short-term funding scheme. You can apply to that and receive the money just a few months later, and it's really quick. And at the same time, I was looking for some long-term solutions, so I applied for Alexander von Humboldt, who fund Germans to go abroad for up to 2 years. It's just about salary, so it's not a research group or lab material or whatever, but that's already something if you already have your salary for 2 years. But then I still thought, okay, it would be nice to have a bit more. And so I applied for Gatter project, Gatter Standard project, so the Czech Science Foundation. And with this, I applied for my own PhD student, technician, lab material, so material costs for traveling for the lab and so on. And I also got this, and so now I have a perspective here of staying here for 3 years. And yeah, doing research with great people, I would say, and on a topic that I like. And I must say that in the meantime, I got an offer to go to Belgium with also a very exciting topic, to work with bristlecone pine, which are among the oldest trees in the world, because they are just super resistant. And yeah, that would have also been a very, very interesting topic. But the reason why I didn't go was, first, I felt that I would not be able to do independent research, as independent as I'm here with my own project, because that was a ready project and I was supposed to do something that someone else suggested me to do. And the other thing was that I knew the team here and I liked the team here, and I didn't want to take the risk at that time to come into a team where I was not sure how things are working there, because I had the impression that already during the interview that there were some kind of tensions in the team. And so yeah, so I stayed here, and let's see for how long I stay here.
Thank you very much for sharing your story with us. And I found it very interesting that, I would say the general opinion or image of a researcher is a historian with his or her archive, and maybe a genetist with his or her microscope, and dendrochronologist with his or her tree. But you were speaking both extensively about teams, and I think that this is an issue which is worth to speak more about. What does it mean to have a team, and what is the teamwork in the academic life what can we gain, and where is the excellence in the individual person or in a team?
Okay, so I mean, obviously, science is quantized into research groups, right? Discretized. There are mathematicians here, so I should be precise. So that is kind of historical, practical for funding reasons and so on, right? The research team kind of works together on a related question as some kind of leader. There are students who are learning, sometimes even on an undergrad level they don't know much, they are only learning, and then there are people who are more experienced and maybe actually better researcher than the head of the group, but they are doing the research, right? So teamwork within the group is crucial, right? But what I want to say is that what I found really extremely enriching, especially at the Max Planck, where I work now for 17 years, is that the institution itself is a team, right? The institution itself has the ambition to be the best not in Dresden, not in Saxony, not in Germany, not in Europe, but in the world. And people are working together to achieve that, right? There's lots of collaboration within the institute. There's a lot of communication on a weekly basis. I sometimes say that we are able to give each other's presentations if somebody is actually sick, right? Because we have heard enough about the research of our colleagues, right? We are always looking for synergies, how we can benefit from each other, so that our team, it's called Max Planck, but in a terminology of football, it can be called Bayern Munich, right? So that our team stays on top and plays the Champions League, right? And so that's what I think for me is something I would really like to bring to a larger degree to Czech Republic, this kind of understanding, that science is a teamwork, and it doesn't mean only that your laboratory has to be better than the laboratory across the hall. It is more about, that the environment where you are looks as good as possible, so that you can attract the best colleagues you can possibly attract in the future and make it, success for everyone, including yourself.
I completely agree with what Mr. Tomančák said, and I got into more detail of the Humboldt strategy before I came here. Of course, I studied that before I applied for the fellowship, but now I checked it again, and one of their main statements is, or I hope I get it right now, please don't fix me to that, but one of the main statements is, or that the mission is to create excellence through collaboration, through international collaboration. And this is one thing that I really like about these organizations like Humboldt Foundation and also DAAD, that they try to connect not just research, but they try to connect people and cultures. And I think that this is really important, and I am really glad that Germany offers these great funding opportunities, and to be able to connect with other researchers, and because I think you can always be stronger when you work in a team, and especially in our field, and I guess it's maybe even much more in your field, and that it's even almost impossible to write or to publish a good paper if you work alone, because everything is about big data, putting a lot of data together, putting a lot of complex analysis together, and it's impossible to be an expert in all those things. So, for example, and now I'm working on a study where I analyzed some data and I did the model, but one of my group members is really an expert in the model, so he can help me to improve the model. Then I have one person from Slovenia who is really an expert in modeling climate data, so he does some kind of climate modeling for me, so I use that climate data. And then, of course, I cannot travel everywhere because, as I was introduced, I'm using a lot of tree lines or a lot of sites, especially tree line sites around the globe, and obviously I cannot travel everywhere, and it would also be a shame for my carbon budget if I would just travel everywhere. So, and a lot of data has been collected, and so why not work together, and not just within the team, but also together with other teams. So my idea, and also my PhD supervisor's idea, was not to try too much to work against other working groups. I mean, of course, there's always a fight, or sometimes there is a fight, at least on the top, who will publish some very new results the first. But if you just step back a little bit from the very top, you can collaborate on a lot of things, and I think that is the only way how to create really great results, if you work together, not just in the team, but across teams, across countries, and with people together who have different backgrounds and different experiences.
It's a very interesting perspective, and a very useful perspective, that it is the team which makes an individual excellent, and which can help you reach the top. And maybe humanities would need more human labs for what they are doing, and can learn a lot from nature science and life science as we hear that. But The other interesting thing is what connects you and not really us as we are discussing right now, because our language is in English, but you both are very much connected to the German environment, and you spoke about Humboldt Foundation and the AAD and Max Planck Institute. How does it fit to speaking and making research in English? Why the first choice comes with the foundations of our biggest neighboring country, Germany? I guess I see it among my students that they are very often scared to go to Germany because of German. I think you can help me to break the myth.
I mean, it depends on the field, right? But in life sciences, you don't need to speak German to work in Germany, right? So I live in Germany for 17 years. Okay, I speak possible German, but I almost never use it. I talk to taxi drivers and to my neighbors, right? But when I function professionally, I speak English. Our institute is 60% foreigners, 40% Germans. Entire administration speaks and writes in English. And in fact, our German colleagues are so considerate that when they talk to each other and somebody else comes, they switch from German to English, which cannot be said, for example, about Italians or Czechs, right? So, if you want to encourage your students to go to Germany in life sciences, you don't need to speak German.
I think I have a similar experience from Germany as a German. So my former lab where I did my PhD was also about 50% foreigners and 50% Germans, and our language was English. And here it's the same. Well, it's not the same because I'm the only German and we have one Polish colleague. But I mean, we speak in English, of course, because I do speak a little bit of Czech in order to get along with daily life. But
speak to the taxi driver.
Yeah, exactly, or to my neighbors. But I would not be able to do scientific discussion in Czech, definitely not. And it's maybe also not necessary. I should use the time to do my research. Yeah, language is a big issue, but I must contradict with the Italians because I've also spent a few months in Italy with a great wood anatomy lab, and they were also very kind when I was there. They spoke just English, but I think that this is really a crucial thing for excellence or to attract other people to make everything open or accessible to other people, which includes having information available and having information in English. And that's true that sometimes I must say it is an issue. And now I started within the frame of the Gotcha project, I started to supervise a PhD student, which automatically means I got involved into a lot of administration and a lot of finances and HR related things, and that's sometimes a struggle. Yeah,
it was a random nationality I picked.
Okay.
So not really, but I think one should also say, okay, so I think I don't want to come across that I'm proud that I don't speak German perfectly, right? So in fact, it's really wonderful to be able to speak the language of the country. It's just that in the environment where I operate, it's you get exposed to it so little that you don't really need it, right? But of course, there are other areas in academia, also in Germany at university, where in fact knowing German is very beneficial, right? But I would say that one should not really take that as an excuse not to go to Germany.
Well, speaking in English over here and touching upon the languages and also about how to get it out there, what we are doing, it correlates in a way with the promoting of our science and our research, not only internationally in English, but sometimes we need it in other languages as well. And sometimes we need it out of the high impact journals. How do you see the promotion of science right now? Mr. Domanjak, you spoke about your Twitter and and so on and so on. What role do the social media and other platforms play in today's researcher's life?
Well, I mean, the role of social media, especially Twitter in science, is increasing and has been over the past years. I was kind of in the environment where I come from, I was the pioneer of using Twitter, but now all my colleagues have Twitter handles. Labs have Twitter handles. They really, promote their research on Twitter. They, formulate opinions on Twitter, and there are some really interesting discussions about the future of scientific endeavor, especially publishing, which are really going on Twitter, are driven from that platform. So you might have opinions about social media or about Twitter, but I think the scientific Twitter, Twitter, is actually something very positive, which has really kind of interlinked the global scientific community. I was just yesterday hosting Oded Reshavi, who is an Israeli scientist who studies intergenerational inheritance. Very interesting research, by the way, because he's kind of showing, that Darwinian view of evolution doesn't always hold, and that Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, who was suggesting that organisms, can pass to the next generation the characters or the skills they learn during their lifetime, that actually works in many cases, and he has been demonstrating that. But why I mention him, I've never met Oded Reshavi in person, but I think I know him extremely well because he is one of the rock stars of scientific Twitter. He has 100,000 followers, and he's very well known for scientific memes. He takes some video, would be a completely funny video, like a penguin or something like this, and he contextualizes that with one sentence to the life in the academic world, right? Just says one sentence about what we struggle with, about publishing, about promotion, about work-life balance, things like that, and he does that so much, that he's a worldwide celebrity, actually. So everybody knows him, and at the same time, he's amazing, doing amazing science. So Twitter can be, very powerful medium to disseminate your science.
I don't know this person, even though I'm on Twitter, but I must admit I'm not
Don't know Oded Reshavi. I cannot believe that.
I'm also not super active, I must say, and I was in the beginning very skeptic to join.
Who knows Oded Reshavi here? Yeah, 1, 2, 3. Okay, impressive.
Yeah. So maybe it's just my ignorance or not using Twitter enough, but yeah. So I was also very skeptic in the beginning to use it, and I was convinced by at that time colleague that we had in Greifswald in my former working group in my lab, and this colleague was from Canada, and she said you have to use Twitter because everything is happening on Twitter. There are positions offered or announced on Twitter before they are offered or announced anywhere else. First results are presented on Twitter before they are published somewhere else. So if you are not on Twitter, you miss half of the thing, and you are always late, and you don't know what's going on. So I joined there, and I must say I like it to some extent, but I think there are not only positive things. Of course, there are a lot of positive things, like you can communicate with a lot of people which usually maybe don't read your paper, so you can do some kind of popular science and maybe reach people who usually would not follow science so much, and it also trains you to kind of put your research in a very compact format, or in a format that is attractive or that brings across your main points. So I find it very useful in that way. And of course it also has all the benefits that you get all the information that I mentioned before. But the downside, in my opinion, is that but maybe as with any other social media, you should be careful to not spend too much time there and to not compare yourself too much with others. Because if you see all the time who is publishing what and who is doing field work where and what new results they have, then there is already some kind of pressure to kind of post basically everything. Even on a Sunday when you go for a walk and see a nice flower, you should post it, because like showing, I'm even doing some science related things on my Sunday and stuff like that. So like with everything you should find a good balance, but definitely I have the impression that it's quite useful.
Well, life-work balance, that would be a topic for at least another hours, and life-work balance with research and social media promotion and excellence brings me to the first question we have from the online audience, or maybe from those of you who use the QR code over here and posted us the question, and that would be: do you believe that competition in research drives excellence in your preferred definition? Why or why not? We are coming back to what excellence is, right?
No, this is a difficult question, especially when you add it in your preferred definition, right? So that kind of, you know, makes the escape by saying that excellence, you have to define excellence, right? So, I mean, competition definitely will be part of what drives success in science, right? But I think, you know, it must not be the only thing, right? I mean, there is also important other, let's say, motivations like curiosity, you know, trying to understand how things work. Maybe even application. This is not something which personally drives me, but many people are driven by doing something which is useful to the society. In life sciences would be human health, but of course, you know, everything we use in daily life is a product of science. So that is definitely the other dimension. And then, you know, I like to also just say, well, one should also have fun, right, doing science. And so that's, you know, maybe the most kind of important part, right? I mean, don't lose with all the other motivations which come, which competition, curiosity, utility, but also one should have fun, you know, and that's hard to achieve, but.
Yeah, I agree that competition is a big factor, but should not be the only one, and it can be positive and negative. So, as I said earlier, during my PhD, I felt quite a lot of pressure towards the end, and in my case, I think it reduced my productivity or my creativity maybe. And I think the fact that I came here and no one expected big things from me, because I was after my PhD, I had a short contract, that really made me like my creativity explode and to write good proposals. So I'm not sure whether I would have been able to write these kind of proposals in my previous environment. Even though I also think that if you have a lot of good people around you that tend to be maybe a little bit better, it also can push you to do better work, or can try to get out the best of you. Yeah.
We have one more question from the audience, and I think after that I will open up and there will be a microphone which will be reached to the participants here. But first maybe to this question, which I may moderate a bit. What is the most interesting discovery you made during your career? And I would maybe add, what is the most interesting discovery you encountered during your career as well?
I would maybe differentiate between this most interesting for me or for the public, because for me personally something very interesting was when I started to work with wood anatomy. And this is basically, so when you have 3 rings, it's not just a ring, the ring is made of cells. And when you make thin sections, prepare thin sections and put color on it, so to stain it, so to enhance the visibility, and look under the microscope, it looks really interesting and really beautiful, all the wood cells. And then if there is some kind of special event, then you can really see it. And for example, if there was a big frost event, the cells look really strange and destroyed. And for me, that was really an interesting moment and great moment to start to look into these secrets, kind of. That's maybe for now.
Okay, so there are 2 questions, right? So most interesting discovery of my career, I would probably go with the kind of recent, let's say, revelation that we might actually understand, how developmental processes in embryos evolve by considering the very classical thinking about evolution that the biological systems are optimizing for a given environment, and that's something which is, a little bit has been always a big conundrum in evolutionary theory, because embryos are really protected from the environment. That's the whole point, right? They are protected by shells or by their mothers or by any means, so they actually really do not interact with the environment. So how does such a system evolve? And of course there are many proposals how this might work, but one of them which we have recently kind of put forward is that in fact the protective layers, they do provide interaction surfaces of the embryos with the environment, and this affects evolution of developmental processes. This is a very kind of specialized thing, but the question was about what is this exciting discovery which I would mention, right? And then for the discovery in general, that's actually really super hard, right? So I was recently stunned by a paper where a colleague has shown that there is a specific molecular mechanism which awakens an additional copy of a gene if you silence one copy, right? So this is very difficult for non-specialists to understand, right? But we are in biology very often knocking out genes, and it's somehow supposed to be a one-way street, right? But in fact, there is a very specific molecular mechanism which says, okay, this gene is missing. Let's look in the genome. There is maybe a similar gene which could actually do it, right? And let's activate that, right? So this goes totally against the central dogma of molecular biology. There is essentially an information now transfer from the protein level back to DNA, right? And so this is discovery by my colleague Didier Steinier from Max Planck, and I found this fascinating. So that came to my mind when I read this question.
Yeah, maybe I can also add something from our field, what is maybe not my own discovery or not only my discovery, but what people have been working on and what I also work on is, so I mostly focus on trees from the tree line, so in the north, in the very north, like Scandinavia, Russia or North America, and also trees from alpine tree lines, so for example the Alps, but also Krkonoše mountains work good enough for that. And so we look into these trees and we try to find out how they respond with their growth to past climate change, in order to derive from that how they might respond to future climate change, because this is super important to know, because they store so much carbon. On the one hand, this is why we want to know it, because they store so much carbon, so we should know what happens to future forests in order to make these carbon model calculations the right way. And the other thing is that maybe you know that tree rings are often used as climate archives, so you can measure the ring width correlated with past climate, where you have climatic records, but you only have good records until maybe around 1900 or a little bit beyond. But then you can extend the climate reconstruction just using these tree rings, because you assume that if you have a white year, it was warm summer. If it was just in very simple words, if it was a narrow year, then it was a cold summer, and so on. And by this you can kind of reconstruct past climate back to, well, I think they have 2,000 years now, more or less, of Northern European pine chronologies. And but this all is based on the assumption that the main climatic signal, or this ring width, is mainly temperature, because a tree line, they don't grow higher or further north because it's colder. So I mean it's too cold. They cannot go further to the north into the tundra or on top of the mountain, because it's too cold in summer. So they don't like it. They don't grow there. So we assume that the main thing that is in the rings is temperature. But now recently it looks like there is not just temperature, but also precipitation or moisture availability in general. And so my PhD supervisor was one of the first who worked on that around the 2000s, and especially in Alaska or North America, Northwest America, this was a big issue. And so it seems to also depend on the region, on the tree species, what is really the effect, or what other effects we can see in tree rings. And this is currently changing a little bit understanding of what we can really see in these climate archives. And so now we look into this using wood anatomy and this one specific tree growth model to try to better understand what is really going on there. Yeah, but we are not the only ones, so several people have started to work on that intensely in the past years.
Why this question is very difficult to answer is that because in science, especially in life science, discoveries are typically about methods, right? And so Nobel Prizes are given for methods, and I just didn't really want to come up with one of the methods which maybe everybody might have heard about, right? So I think it's much more difficult to understand, what is, or to pick, what is like the discovery which is made using the methods, right?
But you mentioned Fiji before, right? So we also sometimes use Fiji, but it's not... That's a different field, yeah, but that's not a discovery, that's a software development. Yeah, I know, but it's still, very interesting.
Well, I think we could go on with discoveries, but we also need some space for your questions. So if there are any questions in the audience, now is the time.
Thank you for the interesting talk. My question would be, especially in the natural sciences, the stars are made by the publishers, right? So do you have some ideal system? How would you imagine the publishing process? Or do you feel now this system confident?
It's a very timely question because we are probably in the midst of a possible change in publishing industry. It's been, of course, a huge debate about how to evaluate scientific success and people's careers, and rightly, most people assume that in life sciences is all about having the papers in the high impact journals, Cell Science, Nature, and there's a whole movement to go against that, right? So there's a new journal, a relatively new journal called eLife, which is a joint initiative of the Harvard Hughes Medical Institute, Max Planck Society, and Wellcome Trust, which is now headed by Michael Eisen, who is the lead proponent of change in the publishing industry to post-publication peer review, right? So to essentially, about his mission is to abolish journals, to essentially set up a system where science is just put out there. The scientific community comments on the quality of the outputs, and like that, the best highest impact, best discoveries are recognized, right? So there are many details to how he wants to implement it in eLife, which are hotly debated on Twitter these days because they rolled it out last week. My view on that is a little bit, we absolutely need a system to evaluate science which is, better than what we have now. It should be kind of a combination of quantitative measures, and I personally consider citations being like a very good one. So one could think about, establishing a system where it would not be so much important like where something is published, but how does it perform? How do people, recognize it? Do they cite it, right? There's many problems because it's very difficult to do that for recently published papers, and it's very incompatible with the journals, right? So one of the ideas which I was pushing was that initial assignment of a paper to a journal should not be the final one. That you would have for something like eLife, you could have a eLife 1 to eLife 10. The initial peer review will say this is an outstanding piece of work, it should be in eLife 2, but 5 years down the line, it turns out that nobody cites it, and so it's actually more like eLife 8. And vice versa, somebody in the peer review says, well, this is actually not very good, or not very important. Usually it's about not very important. The not very good is usually fixed in the peer review, but not very important, so eLife 8. But it turns out that this is the best paper ever, and so, after 5 years, it will become eLife 1, right? So that's my idea. But I'm not the chief editor of eLife, so I cannot make it happen.
Yeah, I agree that, I mean, of course, I think almost every scientist agrees that this is not, the current system is not ideal, but no one really has the solution. But there are some initiatives trying to break the current system, because currently the journals are those who are earning the most. I mean, earning from subscriptions, from those people who have, so mainly universities who subscribe so that the students or employees can access that. And then if you want to have it open access, so that people also who are not subscribed can access it, then you also pay as a scientist and for the publication. So they really earn a lot. And this system also supports all these predatory journals, so those journals that are not really serious or which publish stuff without a serious review, because it's a good thing to make money. And if people just need papers in their list and number of papers, and I can understand that some feel somehow okay with publishing in those. I mean, not a serious scientist would do that, but I see that how people can get to that direction to publish in those predatory journals, because I mean the papers count. And
the current, I mean, coming back maybe to where we are, right? So the current system is very skewed against us. One could actually really say minorities. I got yesterday in trouble on Twitter by, pointing out that Central and Eastern Europe is a minority in science, and people from South America, they really attacked me, saying, how can you say that Europe is the most privileged place in science worldwide? Well, they are right, but it's the Western Europe, it's not the Eastern Europe, right? So for us, it's extremely difficult to get papers in these high impact journals, and I was demonstrating that on the fact, but because of all these eLife discussions, I was checking their editorial board. They have 200 editors from Europe, right? I mean, they have actually quite a few from South America, but they have 200 from Europe. That's a lot, right? How many do you think are from Central and Eastern Europe? Two, right? One Croatian and one from Poland. There are other people on the editorial board who are of Eastern European origin, but they work in the UK, in France, in Germany, right? So that I say this is a scientific inequality, because the people in here, they do not get the experience of making decisions about other people's work. They don't get experience of what is it to be an academic editor, what is it to evaluate, to do. We are just recipients of these decisions, and we are very upset about them, or we are not making them, right? And that's something which I would like to change.
And that's not the only problem. So I mean, there are these regional inequities, but it also concerns gender or career stage. And I mean, it's not my opinion, there are papers about that who did some investigations about how papers go through review process, and it was shown that papers written by women or early career scientists are more likely to be rejected in the first round, or less likely to be accepted. And if you see a big name there, then it's more likely to just to read it with a different view and with other expectations maybe. And it's maybe not on purpose, it's something that just happens, but and that's why this double blind review process could be really useful, so that you don't see who are the authors of the paper. Because I would say, at least in our field, in most cases, when you get something for review, you see who the authors are, but they don't know who the reviewer is. But there are these double-blind review processes that you also don't see who the author is.
That's really interesting. In my field, it will be usually double-blind review, but because the focus is so narrow, you usually know who wrote the paper, so you have maybe a chance of 2 or 3 to have a guess. And
that's the problem, that you can usually figure it out even when it's double-blind, but at least you don't have it in front of you, right? I'm not saying this is a bad idea, actually.
But I would be also interested in your suggestions.
Sorry, I would hide especially affiliations, because what decides is affiliations. Not so much the names, but where it comes from.
What would be the suggestions for the unprivileged Eastern European environment? What should get better, and not only in the space of the scientists, but maybe also institutionally and in the logic how we deal with science in this system of measuring and openness and open science, etc.
I'll focus on quality and not quantity, and you know, be proud of discoveries, not of papers, right? Or maybe not the number of papers, right? One should be, you know, in Max Planck society, this is something which is extremely shocking to everyone in Czech Republic. In Max Planck society, a junior research group, which is, you know, receiving substantial funding for 5 + 4 years. In the first 5 years, it is expected that it produces 1.3 papers. Okay, so okay, it means 1 or 2, but more 1 than 2, right? And you know, of course, doesn't mean that that these groups only publish these little papers, but we are talking about papers which define the group, which is that's the discovery. This is what they did, right? This is their work. They discovered that. They go around meetings talking about it. That they are recognized. That's their work, right? And in 5 years, with all the resources in the world, essentially 1 to 2 is realistic, right? Because science is complex, right? But, you know, in the other, you know, with the metrics which are used here, you know, you would not survive, right? You would not get a grant. You would be just completely out of the business.
Yeah, one thing that was new to me here is that every scientist should enter his or her publications into a database, and then the budget of next year, so of the coming year for the working group, is partly defined on how much publication output you have. And so there is a tendency sometimes, I would say, that you just publish something, or I mean, the tendency exists everywhere, I think, that you publish something in smaller and smaller pieces just to have more, even though I completely agree that good science needs time, and it should be better and should be more valued to write one big paper instead of several small ones.
And there's, of course, a lot of things you can object to, or you could say, well, but I mean, my group has 15 PhD students, you know, how they all need papers to graduate, right? Well, don't have a group with 15 PhD students, you know, that's maybe the answer.
And what about access to the science? What about, you know, all the golden open accesses and databases which many institutions in Czech Republic wouldn't be even able to pay and provide to the researchers at home?
Yes, no, this is atrocious, actually, what has happened to the open access movement, right? Because it's become so expensive that it's actually is really difficult for people in underprivileged parts of the world, where we actually, unfortunately, even within Europe, belong. It's very difficult to pay for it, right? I mean, of course, you know, the society journals, they usually waive the fees, right? But it's become increasingly difficult to say that, you know, that Czech Republic should be like, that the fees should be waived, right? But nevertheless, you know, a colleague of mine from CETEC recently published a Nature article, which is amazing for the institution, right? But the fee is 5,000 euros. Right, I mean, in this country, if to write a grant to get this much money, right, it's not like that is lying somewhere, right? And so, you know, something has to change.
Well, I think we all agree on it across our disciplines, but I wondered if there are more people who would like to join the discussion. I would also ask you maybe to, because we are in a very small round, to introduce yourself and say from which, from where you are.
I'm Jiří Tuma from the Faculty of Mathematics and Physics. And I just want to ask our distinguished guest from Brno, because in your introduction you said that the research excellence in the Czech Republic is almost sleeping. So I would rather say that it's the drive for excellence is almost sleeping. But anyway, what do you see as the main obstacles for that, and what do you think can be done to improve the situation?
I would say, you know, repeat also once again what I said before. You know, we should really value more the quality over quantity in science, for sure. We should also maybe kind of value more collaborative research amongst ourselves. You know, my feeling is that the Czech researchers are very individualized. That everybody, you know, sees their laboratory as the unit which needs to succeed, right? So thinking a little bit broader, that it's better that the whole institution succeeds, because that will have an effect that it's more likely that the whole institution succeeds, because typically it has a critical mass of the excellent researchers. When it succeeds, it will become visible, it will be noticed. And when it will be noticed, it will be able to attract more young, talented researchers from abroad. And this will start the cycle of making the institution really competitive on the worldwide stage, right? So that would be one way how to do that.
If I may add something to that. So I think one point where things could change would be the funding of the PhD students. I mean, I did not do my PhD here, but I see the PhD students around in our department and also our new PhD student. And so as far as I understand, the standard funding is that they get a state scholarship, which is really low in my opinion, and which is definitely not enough to survive if you don't have any other income. And if you're lucky, you can get some more money from a project. And I think there are some movements, or there is the wish to kind of lower the number of PhD students and at the same time to increase their scholarship or their salary. But the problem is then that the university, as far as I understand, receives then less money because they receive money per PhD student. So everyone wants to have a lot of students, but they cannot really pay them. And then the result is that the students work somewhere else, they don't finish, or they don't really focus on their work because they have some other work, and then they really start to like it. So after 2-3 years, they drop out. So you have nothing from that. And it's not only students, because I have, at least at our faculty or department, there are established researchers, even professors, who have another position because they cannot be fully funded from the university. And I think that's one main thing that is important for excellence or good research, that you can really live from that and focus on that and don't jump between different things and struggle with your daily life, to just survive in daily life.
I think, Jelena, you touched a point which is troubling us all very much. And sometimes I have the feeling that the Czech academia gave up on that, and we are just tired and sad. But maybe you would have another observation and input from your long-standing international expertise. So what to do about this precarious state of our PhD students, of their mentors, who are very often not paid for mentoring a PhD student at all, and of the general state, a precarious state of academia over here.
I don't know maybe so much about what the state of the students is, right? But with speaking about mentors, I don't really observe, massive kind of existential problems among my colleagues, right? I mean, science is, there's a few exceptions, not a way to get rich, but you get a lot of freedom, and people, find a way how to get a decent support salary to get by, right? So I don't really, of course in Germany you might be paid much more, but you pay more taxes also, right? So it's really, I think that inequality is not so strong, and it's coming closer and closer together, right? So and mentoring, mentoring is your duty. you don't get paid for mentoring, right? It's even anywhere, it's if you go to Cambridge, you are expected to do 3 jobs. You have to run an internationally visible research group, you have to teach, and you have to tutor at the college, right? And for that you get one salary and free meals at the college, right? So, it's not something. I participate in the mentoring of the people who are preparing ERC grants. We are not. As far as maybe we are actually compensated for that a little bit, right? But not actually much, right? So in a sense, I think I don't see that as the biggest problem in Czech academia. If it is a problem for someone, I'm sorry, and it will probably get better, because it definitely got better over. I haven't been here for 25 years, right? Well, I come, and all my colleagues, are relatively well off. I don't see them. I don't see this Václav Klaus, that the scientists have to tighten their belts, and the only good science comes when they suffer, right? I honestly don't see that.
It's very good to hear that. At least summary, it looks very positive. I would ask the audience for maybe our last question, even though this was a very positive outcome of this great debate.
I got killed on Twitter after this, but
I do see one question here. To what degree do you reach the success in science based on your skills, efforts, etc., and which effect had the environment, like family, teachers, and good luck?
Do you want to start? I already had time to think about this. Maybe I can start. Right? So that's a good question. I will speak for myself. In my case, the key was the colleagues which worked with me in the stage of my career where I was not doing science on my own. So I give them all the credit, and the luck. The other things, none of that I had.
My dad always said luck is with those who work hard. So I think it goes together.
Which I don't mean to say that my family wasn't supportive, right? But it didn't provide advantages.
Yeah, I'm the first person in my family to study, so they said, okay, just do your thing, and we like what you do, but we don't understand what you do, so just do your thing.
Me, first PhD in the family, as far as the eye can see.
Yeah, but at the same time, it could be a benefit. Like, if you grow up in a family where everyone has a PhD, then you might feel under pressure, and everyone is different, and not just because you are born in such a family, you must be the same. So,
at the same time, I think it's a fine tradition of Czech academia to have scientific couples. They are here. They are all over the world. You see them. Maybe one should put some statistics on it, but I think it's really, really unique. Yeah.
And I think my working group, my PhD working group, was really great. So my supervisor was asking a lot for me, and I always thought I'm not good enough. But by this, he also pushed me a lot, and now I realize that it was really a competitive and demanding environment, and that's for sure something that has somehow shaped my current position. Yeah.
Thanks a lot for the great discussion. I would like to ask Jelena if. Well, we discussed that the situation in science in the Czech Republic is not so simple, but still I would like to twist it and ask you whether for you like something better here in the Czech Republic compared to Germany? Mm-hmm. So that will be one question to you, and I have also 2 little questions to Mr. Tomančák. One is the Brno-Dresden thing. Basically, you have 2 places where you have to travel a lot, so how much annoying is it? And second question is related to the stage of your career, because you collected a lot of experiences, and this so I guess that your position changes a lot. Now you are more of a science manager, or both maybe, scientist and science manager. So how do you cope with that? Are you just fine with that, or you would rather like to have more time for science only, or?
Yeah, so one very good thing that I see here, not maybe primarily for me, but for the system in general, that there is this system of scholarships for students, for PhD students, which they can apply for during their PhD, this GAUK system, which makes students think about a research topic or an own topic at a very early stage. And so now we are just preparing this, or my student is trying to prepare that. So he started in October, and at the beginning of November he's supposed to submit that. And I think that's quite a demanding thing. And when I think back, I think I might have struggled with that. And I think, but it's a really good thing that you have here, that it's kind of expected that students apply to that grant, in order to make them think about their plan, and also the fact that they need to prepare a study plan to really fix what do you need to do in each year. Because in Germany, I think it's still rather, it's also a good thing that you should develop your independent research and not have too very strict frame of your studies, but at the same time you can tend to be unfocused because you can do basically everything. And this is what I like here about the PhD system, at least, that there is this kind of this structure that you should follow, and that you should put down within your first weeks, and then try to stick to that. I think it's difficult to say one thing is better here than there, because I think a lot of things depend really on the working group. I have also in Germany, I've worked in different groups. I have studied in Hamburg and learned to work with the working group there. Then I moved on to Greifswald, and they were very different. And so I think now my group is quite similar to the group that I had in Hamburg in terms of style and culture in the group. So this is nothing that I would really say is a difference between countries. Yeah, I think I might not have been able to apply for such a. No, I would have been able. I could have applied to DFG, German. German Research Council Fellowship in Germany, but I found it, I think, relatively easy here for an early career scientist to apply for such a Gatscher grant, so a full grant. I think that would have been more difficult in Germany for an early career scientist. And then what I like here, and what I've heard from other scientists, we will see whether that's relevant for me or not. So if you just, if you really want it, and if you put a lot of effort, I have the impression that it is somehow possible to stay in science, or to become a professor, if you just work hard and complete all your tasks and do habilitation and so on. While in Germany, we don't have the system of assistant professor, associate professor, or research, there is Max Planck Institute or these research institutes, which might have maybe a little bit more. They don't have associate and assistant professor, I think. But as far as I see it, in Germany, there are much less of these positions in between. So there is postdoc, and then there is professor, and there is this super strong bottleneck. And if you don't make it, then you're out, and then all your work, well, it's not in vain, but I think Germany should do more in order to keep scientists that are somewhere between postdoc and the super top professor. And I think that is something that is better here. So there are more positions at different levels and different stages. And it's somehow possible to stay in science maybe you have different experience or more knowledge if you really work hard and if you really like it. Yeah.
So it's a very interesting perspective, actually, right? Because I think one could also consider it a weakness, right? But because there are so many flavors of people who are, essentially postdocs, but they could be called very different things, and their job typically depends on whether the next round of the grant is going to be approved, right? So the security is not so dramatic, at least speaking from the experience at SATEC, right? But maybe at universities there's more permanent positions. I don't really know much about it. So I wanted to to your question. Okay, so Dresden, Brno. So the D1 has been finally fixed. So that's good. Going around Prague is really annoying. if you could do something about that, that would be wonderful. You know, train works quite well as well, and I will tell you at the end why I don't use it enough, why I drive. This is just kind of joking around a little bit. I mean, of course, you know, I now do 20% of my time CETEC and 80% at the Max Planck Society, and you know, it is really hard, and you know, in the future something will have to change, and I have been kind of very upfront about it. You know, I want to understand, you know, whether I can be useful in Brno, and if I conclude that I can, you know, then maybe I will switch it, right? Or maybe come even fully, but so far, you know, there's been not enough time to understand, you know, whether I can have the impact which I would like to have, right? So that's the answer, right? And what I'm mostly interested, you know, to have, you know, of course I have very little time for other things, but what I really want to have time for is cycling, right? So that has become, you know, the passion of my life during COVID. I have cycled 800 kilometers in the first 48 years of my life, and I've cycled 20,000 in the last 2.5 years, right? And so, you know, I actually really enjoy being able to cycle in Dresden, in Brno, back home in Beskidi. Actually, right now, I really like that because I can do a more diverse cycling. This is like kind of a light answer to your question.
Well, thank you very much for serious and light answers of the last round of questions. It was very nice to discuss with you and to have you here. It was very nice to have the perspectives from two countries, from different generations, and from gendered as well, gendered opinions. And I very much hope and I wish the cafe collaborations very best luck in the future, and will be very much looking forward to cooperate, to see the next sessions which cafe collaborations will do, and perhaps to see you as speakers or as guests of the next meetings. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear guests, Mr. Tomančák, Mrs. Lange, and Mrs. Králová. Thank you very much for this frank and open and highly interesting debate. I really enjoyed it, and I would like to invite you, as well as the auditors, for a small refreshment, for a glass of wine. You really deserve it. But first, I would like to ask your signature on the wall of fame.
Chlebičky.
Not exactly chlebičky, but something. I hope you will like it. But please, first, your signature on our wall of fame. Thank you very much. And I would like to thank all the organizers also, and of course our dear technicians for the support today.